Well, it sounds like America's farm team for attorneys is standing up for itself. But will this be effective against Donald Trump? I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green. This episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And gentlemen, Harvard University has decided that they don't want to play nice with the Trump administration the way I believe Columbia did when they were trying to protect $400 million in federal funding and agreed to, at least tentatively agreed to, a bunch of things the Trump administration wanted them to do. Harvard is basically saying we are not going to allow the Trump administration to squelch our free speech just to hang on to $2.2 billion in federal funding. And actually, it's a lot more than that coming down the pike. Stephen Green, I'm sure you're up on this, but basically the Trump administration is saying, look, Harvard, if you want to spend the people's money from people across the country, then you're going to need to abide by some common sense rules. And one of those is not using federal dollars to brainwash people to become anti-Semites or to help foster protest movements among supporters of Hamas on your campus. Another is not brainwashing people into thinking that everybody in this country who didn't have ancestors as slaves is complicit in the slavery of those ancestors. Steve, it seems like a common sense thing that if you want federal funding, then you need to do what the federal government requires in order for you to get and retain that federal funding. But do you see this really as an academic free speech issue? Because that's the argument Harvard's making, is that basically President Trump is reaching into the classroom and changing what this great university, or trying to change what this great university can tell students.
Yeah, and Harvard, keep in mind, Harvard's not hurting. They've got an endowment of over $50 billion, which, frankly, if it were up to me, I would take that endowment. I wouldn't take it. It's theirs. But I would tax that endowment. It's the returns it generates, which are considerable returns every year. I would tax those returns at 100% for every dollar that doesn't go to student aid or construction or maintenance of their facilities. And they're just, I mean, they're an investment bank that teaches some students now and then.
Precisely.
And that's not the business that they're supposed to be in. So I would start there. And, make them get serious about the education again. Harvard's been a hotbed of anti-Semitism, and really, mostly what Trump is trying to do here is to get Harvard and these other universities to comply with existing laws concerning non-discrimination. Laws. Exactly. And Harvard doesn't want to do that. In fact, what did they say? I mentioned this earlier at Instapot, where I post a few things every day. The Harvard Jewish Alumni Alliance said Harvard's fighting the Trump administration harder than it's ever fought anti-Semitism, which I thought was pretty great. No, I'm not going to read you this whole long Harvard thing. I would say a couple of things, though. One of them is that Harvard has neither the right to your tax dollars nor really the expectation of any tax dollars. If they happen to get some, well, they better earn it, as far as I'm concerned. That said, I wouldn't give them a dime because they've got that $50 billion endowment. They can spend their own money. The other thing is what I call the modern version of paying the Danegeld. I probably talked about this before. In ancient England, and there was a tax called the Danegeld, which was collected from the people so that when the Vikings showed up to rape and pillage, you could pay them off. So the Vikings would show up and say, okay, we're going to rape and pillage, or you can give us the money, and if you give them the money, they're just going to keep coming back for more. So it was either pay the Danegeld, really, get raped and pillaged, or stand and fight. And so the expression is, once you pay the Danegeld, you'll never be rid of the Dane, the Danes being the Vikings. But in the modern welfare state, it doesn't work that way. Once you take the Danegeld, once you take that money from Washington, that sweet free money, they're going to start putting strings on it. So once you take the Danegeld, you're never going to be rid of the Dane, because it doesn't matter who's in charge in Washington. Maybe it's Donald Trump, maybe it's Barack Obama. They're going to have different ideas of how you should spend that money, the things you should do if you're going to keep getting that money. And so the best solution is never to take it in the first place.
Bill Whittle, it seems that for years, the government and Democrats specifically have not really had any sort of problem with attaching strings to federal money and saying how those institutions that receive that money can use them. The problem now is different. The Trump administration is actually saying that they want to see a diversity of views. So when you hear from the White House, it's more diversity in views. What you hear from Harvard and their supporters is they're trying to clamp down on what can be expressed in the classroom. And it sounds to me, Bill, like the Trump administration really isn't saying you can't teach your leftist tripe. What they're saying is you need to throw in some conservative pork bellies with that as well.
Fight fiercely, Harvard. Fight, fight, fight. Impress them with our prowess, do. That's the greatest of Tom Lehrer's songs. It just makes me cry every time. Impress them with our prowess, do. Yes, so fight fiercely, Harvard. I couldn't agree with Steve more on this. They have a $50 billion endowment. Why are they getting any money from taxpayers at all? Why? It's an absolute outrage. It's unforgivable. You could probably make the case for state universities getting some assistance and so on, but even then, you'd think that would be the job of the state. And coming from the University of Florida, I mean, the University of Florida spends billions of dollars so that the football team can have a university that they're proud of, and it's just another one of these boondoggles, Scott. I don't think it's a question of whether or not we should be talking about whether they get the money if they do this or if they do that. The question should be, why are we paying them in the first place? These universities are the intellectual center of anti-Americanism, and they expect to sit on these nest eggs that are, they're condor eggs. That's for an absolute fact. And then they expect the American taxpayers, hardworking people in Kansas, to pay tax money so that Harvard can do what? More of what? If universities were running at a loss, you could make the case that it would be in the national interest to subsidize higher education because of the benefits that would accrue by having a competent team, core of engineers, scientists, doctors, and all the rest of it, if they were running at a loss and needed subsidies. But subsidizing these things just get richer and richer every year. And by the way, I don't know how many public student loans or grants Harvard gets, but the huge majority of colleges in this country not only get money from the government, they also get money from the government through student loans that are backed by the federal government. Yeah. And if you decide not to pay it off, then you don't have to pay it. As trillions of dollars of taxpayer money that's going to these universities. I say no. I say no. I mean, look, I went to college. It's 7 years of college down the drain for me, and I had a wonderful time and I learned a lot, but I paid my way through, and I got an education in exchange for what I paid. The people that go to Harvard are coming from almost exclusively very well-to-do backgrounds, and those that are not coming from well-to-do backgrounds can have scholarships that are paid for from the Harvard endowment. I just think it's just plain nuts.
In fact, with an endowment that size, there's no need that any student should ever have to pay tuition to go to Harvard, and there should be no financial barriers. And I know that these major universities like Harvard are offering more and more free scholarships, at least tuition, to students as time goes on, because they have the endowment funds. It's really kind of an amazing system, because essentially they're bringing together some of America's wealthiest and most prominent young people who are from families that have already developed some source of wealth. And then those people hang out with each other. The best thing you get from Harvard University and other universities like it is not a diploma. It's the connections with people you went to school with. And those connections are the gold that keeps it coming. And then those people get out and they say, wow, we had a great experience there. A lot of my success had to do with the connections now they'll say the education, but really the connections that they made at school. And so they're happy to give to the university to create this monstrous endowment fund, which is just snowballed. It's really a very effective investment corporation. Like Steve said, it's like a giant hedge fund that's developed all these resources. Now, that said, I think, number one, most Americans would be shocked to learn that there are billions of federal dollars. And when we were talking about Columbia and they said $400 million, I gasped at $400 million. As Bill likes to say, Scott, you sweet summer child. That's peanuts. That's nothing. They are, and this $2.2 billion is really relatively small in the total scope of the federal money that flows through Harvard. Now, Harvard people would argue, and other major universities like this, a lot of these are Ivy League schools that are running into problems with the Trump administration, that the money they're getting, much of it, is not only going maybe to help a few students, but it's also going to do medical and scientific research that they're well qualified to perform because they're among the top, medical researchers or quantum physics researchers or whatever that field is. And so this is money well spent to do the kind of general science, for example, that individual companies might not want to do because it doesn't result in an immediately marketable product. And so they're saying this is a good investment and that Trump's playing politics, that he's squelching free speech. But I don't think it's a free speech issue. And all I would say to Harvard University is, I always love it when anybody takes a principled stand, even if I disagree with their principles. So go ahead, Harvard, fight, stand up, take a stand and say, no, thank you, Mr. President. We don't want your filthy billions of dollars. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.